What if I told you that everything you think you know about yourself is a lie? What if the person you see in the mirror every morning, with your comfortable routines, your predictable problems, your civilized assumptions about who you are, what if that person only exists because you've never truly been tested? Welcome to Stranded, where we follow your journey from the wreckage of your old life to the shores of something you never knew you could become. You're about to discover what happens when the storm strips away everything except the question that matters most. Who are you when no one is watching, when no one is coming to save you, and when survival depends entirely on what you can find inside yourself? Today, you're waking up on a beach with salt in your lungs and sand in your hair, completely unaware that your comfortable life ended the moment the waves threw you onto this shore. Close your eyes, feel that hot sun burning your skin, and prepare to learn that sometimes the most dangerous journey isn't getting home, it's discovering you might not want to. You wake to the sound of waves washing against sand, a rhythmic pulse that pulls you from the darkness. Your eyes open slowly, squinting against harsh sunlight that cuts through the haze of confusion. Salt stings your lips, and your mouth feels like sandpaper. Every muscle in your body aches with a deep, bone-deep soreness that speaks of trauma you can't quite remember. You're lying face down on a beach, half buried in wet sand that has molded itself around your body. Your clothes are torn and soaked through, clinging to your skin like a second uncomfortable layer. As you push yourself up on trembling arms, the world spins slightly before settling into focus. The beach stretches in both directions, a crescent of pale sand bordered by dense green jungle that rises like a wall behind you. To your right, black rocks jut from the sand like broken teeth, and to your left, the beach curves away into a distant point. But it's what lies scattered around you that makes your stomach clench with realization. Splintered wood that was once part of a hull, twisted metal that might have been rigging, scraps of canvas sail now torn and bleached by salt water, a life preserver deflated and useless. The pieces of what was once your vessel are spread across the sand like the bones of some great sea creature. You remember now, the storm that came from nowhere, the way the waves grew into mountains of black water, the screaming wind that tore at everything. You remember the moment when you knew the ship was lost, the desperate scramble for anything that might float. And then, nothing until now. Standing on unsteady legs, you turn in a slow circle, scanning the horizon. Nothing but endless blue water, meeting endless blue sky. No other survivors. No rescue boats. No distant smudge of land that might offer hope. You are alone. You're on what appears to be a deserted island, with nothing but the wreckage around you and whatever skills you can remember or learn. The sun is already hot on your back, and you can feel dehydration beginning to tug at the edges of your consciousness. Survival. That's what this is now. Not rescue, not hoping for help. Survival. You force yourself to move, to think practically, despite the growing panic that threatens to overwhelm you. First things first, inventory. What do you have to work with? You begin picking through the debris systematically, your hands shaking slightly as you sort through the wreckage of your former life. A waterproof bag, somehow still sealed, contains a few energy bars and a water bottle half full. It's not much, but it's something. You find a folding knife with a cracked handle, still sharp enough to be useful. A piece of tarp, torn but large enough to provide some shelter. Rope, tangled but serviceable. a small metal pot, dented but intact. Each discovery feels like a small victory against the enormity of your situation. You find a cigarette lighter. Amazingly, it still works when you test it. The flame is small and precious, representing fire, warmth, cooking, signaling. You treat it like the treasure it now is. Your clothes are ruined, but you find a spare shirt in the waterproof bag that's only slightly damp. You change quickly, spreading your wet clothes on the hot sand to dry. The sun feels good on your skin, but you know it will become an enemy if you're not careful. Looking up and down the beach, you try to get a sense of your new world. The island appears to be roughly oval-shaped, maybe 2 miles long from what you can see. Dense tropical vegetation covers most of it, rising to what looks like hills or low mountains in the center. The beach where you've landed faces what you assume is the ocean side, given the size of the waves. You need shelter, and you need it before nightfall. The sun is already past its peak, and you have no idea how cold it might get after dark. Using the tarp and some of the longer pieces of wreckage, you begin constructing a basic windbreak against a large piece of the hull that's buried nose. First in the sand. It's crude work, but it will have to do. You string the rope between 2 pieces of debris and drape the tarp over it, anchoring the edges with stones and sand. It's barely large enough for you to crawl inside, but it's shelter. As the sun begins to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, you sit beside your makeshift shelter and eat one of the energy bars slowly, making it last. The reality of your situation is sinking in. This might not be temporary. Back at your shelter, you set about the task of purifying water properly. You gather dry wood from the beach debris and build a small fire ring using stones from the waterline. The lighter's flame catches the driest splinters, and soon you have a modest fire crackling in the morning air. But boiling water in the pot directly over flames would blacken it with soot and waste fuel. You remember reading somewhere about heating stones and dropping them into water, a technique that seemed primitive then, but makes perfect sense now. You select smooth, dry rocks from well above the tide line, avoiding any that might have cracks or might have been soaked with seawater. While the stones heat in your fire, you explore the immediate area around your camp more thoroughly. The beach curves in both directions, forming a natural bay that's protected from the worst of the ocean swells. Behind your shelter, the jungle rises gradually toward what appears to be a ridge or hilltop in the center of the island. You find more useful debris scattered along the waterline, a plastic container that can hold water, some rope in better condition than what you found yesterday, and what looks like part of a tackle box with a few fishing hooks inside. Each discovery feels like a small gift from the sea. The stones in your fire glow red hot after 20 minutes. Using 2 pieces of wood as tongs, you carefully lift one and drop it into the pot filled with stream water. It hisses violently, sending up a cloud of steam. The water bubbles and churns around the stone. You add a second stone, and the water reaches a rolling boil. You let it boil for several minutes, then use another heated stone to keep it hot longer. The process is slow and uses a lot of fuel, but when you taste the cooled water, it's clean and safe. You've solved your most immediate survival need. The rest of the morning is spent improving your shelter and establishing routines. You move your camp slightly closer to the jungle edge, where you can access the stream more easily. Using debris and the tarp, you build a more substantial windbreak and create a small area where you can work on tasks while staying in shade. You also begin keeping a mental inventory of everything you'll need for long-term survival: better shelter, reliable food sources, tools, signaling equipment for rescue, and a way to stay healthy. The island is beautiful, but it's also completely indifferent to whether you live or die. Night on the island is nothing like you expected. The temperature drops dramatically once the sun disappears, and despite your windbreak, the cold seems to seep into your bones. You huddle in your shelter, listening to sounds you've never heard before, strange bird calls, rustling in the jungle, the constant wash of waves that seemed soothing during the day, but now sounds ominous in the darkness. You don't sleep much. Every sound makes you wonder what kind of animals might live here, what dangers you haven't yet discovered. When you do doze, you dream of water, endless, churning water that wants to pull you down into its depths. Dawn comes slowly, grey light gradually revealing your small camp and the beach beyond. Your body is stiff and sore from sleeping on sand, and your mouth feels even drier than yesterday. The half bottle of water you found won't last long in this heat, and finding a reliable source of fresh water has become your most urgent priority. You force yourself to eat half of another energy bar, knowing you need to conserve your supplies, but also needing the energy for what lies ahead. Today, you need to explore inland and find water, or you won't see many more sunrises. The jungle edge is closer than it appeared yesterday, maybe 50 yards from your shelter. As you approach it, the wall of green seems almost impenetrable. Vines hanging like curtains, broad leaves that could hide anything, trees so thick you can barely see between them. But you can hear something that gives you hope, the sound of running water, faint but distinct, coming from somewhere deeper in the jungle. You take the folding knife and begin cutting your way through the vegetation, following the sound. The going is slow and exhausting, and within minutes you're covered in sweat and small scratches from thorns and branches. But the sound of water grows stronger. After what feels like hours, but is probably only 30 minutes, you break through into a small clearing where a stream runs over smooth rocks, maybe 3 feet wide and ankle deep. The water is clear and cold, and when you cup it in your hands and taste it cautiously, it's sweet and clean. You drink deeply, then fill your water bottle. But you know you need to be careful. Water from unknown sources can carry diseases that could kill you as surely as dehydration. You remember something about boiling water to purify it, and you have the pot and the lighter. Your first full day of survival teaches you that staying alive requires constant attention to small details. You improve your water collection system by creating a small channel that directs stream water into a pool you've dug and lined with stones. This gives you easier access to water without having to fight through the jungle each time. Food becomes your next priority. The energy bars won't last more than a few days, and you need to find sustainable sources of nutrition. You remember coconuts from yesterday and spend time learning to open them properly. The folding knife isn't ideal for the job, but by wedging the blade into the seam and twisting, you can crack them open. The milk is sweet and the meat filling, though eating too much at once makes your stomach cramp. You find other edible plants along the jungle edge, broad leaves that taste slightly sour but seem safe, small red berries that birds are eating, and what might be wild onions growing near the stream. You test each new food cautiously, eating only small amounts and waiting to see how your body reacts. The afternoon brings your first real challenge with weather. Clouds build rapidly over the island, and within an hour you're in the middle of a tropical downpour. Your shelter holds up reasonably well, but you realize how exposed you still are to the elements. Water drips through gaps in your tarp roof, and the wind drives rain horizontally under your windbreak. You spend the storm improving your shelter, using pieces of palm frond to better seal the gaps and digging a small trench around the perimeter to direct water away from your sleeping area. It's wet, frustrating work, but by the time the storm passes, your shelter is significantly more weatherproof. The rain also gives you an important lesson about water collection. You set up the plastic container to catch rainwater, and in just 2 hours of heavy rain, it's nearly full. This could be an important backup water source during future storms. As evening approaches, you take stock of your progress. You have water, basic shelter, and enough food for a few more days. You're learning the rhythms of the island, when the wind picks up, when storms might develop, how the tide affects the debris that washes ashore. But you also realize how much you don't know. The island extends in both directions beyond what you can see from your camp, and you have no idea what resources might be available elsewhere or what dangers might exist. Your second day begins with a decision that feels momentous. You're going to explore beyond your immediate area and try to understand the full scope of your new world. You've established the basics of survival, but now you need information. How big is this island? What resources does it offer? Are there better locations for a long-term camp? You prepare carefully for the expedition. You fill both your water bottle and the plastic container with boiled water, pack the remaining energy bars, and take the folding knife. You also bring along a piece of charcoal from your fire to mark trees and rocks so you can find your way back. Starting north along the beach, you begin a systematic exploration of the coastline. You make charcoal marks on distinctive rocks every few hundred yards, creating a trail you can follow home. The going is easier along the sand, though you have to detour around occasional rocky outcroppings that extend into the water. After about an hour of walking, the beach curves sharply to the right, and you realize you're seeing the northern tip of the island. From this vantage point, you can look back south and get a better sense of the island's shape. It's roughly oval, maybe 3 miles long and 2 miles wide, larger than you initially thought. The northern end is different from your camp area. The jungle comes right down to the water here, and there are more rocky areas and small coves. In one protected inlet, you discover something that makes your heart race. Tide pools filled with mussels, sea anemones, and small crabs. This could be a significant source of protein. You spend time learning to harvest the shellfish safely, remembering warnings about eating them from polluted water. But these pools are constantly refreshed by clean ocean water, and the mussels seem healthy. You collect a few to test back at camp, wrapping them in large leaves. Continuing your exploration inland from the tide pools, you discover that the northern part of the island has a different character entirely. The trees are different, larger and older looking, with massive trunks and spreading canopies. The ground is carpeted with fallen leaves and feels almost park-like compared to the dense jungle near your camp. As afternoon approaches, you begin the journey back to camp, following your charcoal trail markers. But now you're walking with new knowledge. The island is bigger and more diverse than you thought, with multiple potential resource areas. You're not just surviving on a small patch of beach, you're living on a substantial piece of land with real possibilities. The trek back gives you time to think and plan. Tomorrow, you'll explore the southern end. After that, you'll need to consider whether your current camp location is the best choice, or whether you should relocate to be closer to the tide pools or other resources you might discover. Your third morning on the island begins with a discovery that changes everything. While gathering driftwood for your morning fire, you notice something wedged between two large rocks at the tide line, something that doesn't belong with the natural debris. You work it free carefully, and your breath catches when you see what it is. A bottle. Not just any bottle, but a thick glass wine bottle with a cork still firmly in place. Inside, you can see something that makes your hands shake as you hold it up to the morning light. Paper. Someone has put a message in a bottle, and the ocean has delivered it to your beach. You carry it back to your shelter with the reverence of someone handling a religious artifact. This represents the first evidence that other human beings exist in your world, that you're not completely alone in an endless ocean. You set it carefully on a flat piece of driftwood and study it before opening it. The bottle appears old, the glass slightly clouded with age. The cork is covered with what looks like wax, sealing it completely. The paper inside is rolled tightly, and you can see that there's writing or drawing on it, though you can't make out details through the glass. You build up your fire and heat your knife blade until it's warm enough to soften the wax around the cork. Working slowly and carefully, you scrape away the seal and begin working the cork loose. It resists at first, swollen with age and moisture, but eventually comes free with a soft pop that sounds loud in the morning air. The smell that emerges is musty but not unpleasant old paper, a hint of salt, something that might be ink. You tip the bottle carefully and let the rolled paper slide out into your palm. It's yellowed with age and feels fragile but intact. You unroll it slowly, afraid it might crumble at your touch. What you see makes you sit back on your heels in amazement. It's a map, hand-drawn in faded brown ink, showing what is unmistakably your island, but with details you haven't discovered yet. The coastline is accurate from what you've seen so far, including the bay where you've made camp and the northern point you explored yesterday. But the map shows much more. The southern end of the island, inland features you haven't seen, and most intriguingly, several locations marked with symbols and notations. Near the center of the island, there's a mark labeled simply "Well" in careful handwriting. On the western shore, another mark with the notation "Cave, fresh water." Along the eastern coast, symbols that might indicate additional resources or landmarks. Someone else was here before you. Someone who took the time to map this place in detail, who found resources you haven't discovered. And they left this map in a bottle, perhaps hoping someone like you would find it someday. You spend the entire morning studying the map by firelight, comparing it to your own mental picture of the island and trying to understand what the previous mapmaker was trying to tell you. The handwriting is neat and careful, suggesting someone with education and patience. The map itself shows a level of detail that could only come from spending considerable time here. The well, marked in the island's interior, is the most intriguing feature. Islands don't typically have freshwater wells. They're surrounded by salt water, and any groundwater is usually contaminated. But the notation is clear and definitive, marked with a small circle and careful lettering that suggests the mapmaker considered this important. You trace the route from your camp to the marked well location. It appears to be roughly in the center of the island, probably requiring a significant hike through jungle terrain. From your current position, you'd need to head inland past the stream you've been using, then continue up what the map shows as a gradual slope toward higher ground. The cave marking on the western shore is equally fascinating. Fresh water is noted beside it, suggesting another source of drinking water. If the map is accurate, you could potentially have multiple water sources, which would give you much more flexibility in choosing a permanent camp location. You also notice that the map shows several beaches and coves you haven't seen yet, particularly along the southern and eastern shores. Some appear larger than others, and one on the eastern side has a small notation that might say "protected," though the writing is difficult to read. But what strikes you most is what the map doesn't show, any indication of how to get off the island. No markings for harbors, landing sites, or shipping routes. This suggests the mapmaker either didn't expect to leave or didn't want others to leave easily. Tomorrow you'll attempt to reach the marked well. It's ambitious, probably a full day's hike through unknown terrain, but if there really is a reliable freshwater source in the island's interior, it could transform your survival situation. You spend the rest of the day preparing for the expedition. You practice with your fire starting, making sure you can quickly create fire with the limited fuel you'll be able to carry. You test different ways of carrying water, finally settling on both the bottle and the plastic container. You also create a more detailed trail marking system, practicing with charcoal on nearby trees. That evening, as you sit beside your fire studying the map once more, you feel something you haven't experienced since washing up on this beach: hope. Not just hope for survival, but hope that you might actually thrive here. Someone else figured out how to live on this island well enough to map it thoroughly. If they could do it, so can you. The journey to find the well begins before dawn. You've packed everything you think you'll need: both water containers, the remaining energy bars, the knife, materials for fire starting, and most importantly, the precious map. You've also brought several pieces of charcoal for marking your trail. Getting lost in the island's interior could be fatal. The route starts along the familiar path to your stream, but then continues inland up a gradual slope through increasingly dense jungle. The going is slow and exhausting. You have to cut through vines and push aside branches, and within an hour you're soaked with sweat and covered in small scratches from thorns. But the map proves remarkably accurate. Every landmark it shows, a distinctive rock formation, a fallen tree, a small clearing, appears exactly where indicated. Whoever drew this map knew the island intimately, and their careful work is guiding you safely through terrain that would otherwise be impenetrable. After 3 hours of steady climbing, you reach what the map indicates should be the well site. At first, you see nothing but more jungle, trees, vines, and the usual tangle of tropical vegetation. But then you notice something that doesn't quite fit. Stones arranged too neatly to be natural, partially hidden by decades of plant growth. Clearing away the vegetation reveals something extraordinary. It's not a traditional well, but rather a natural depression in the rock that's been carefully improved and expanded by human hands. Someone has built up the sides with fitted stones, creating a basin about 6 feet across and maybe 4 feet deep. And it's full of water. The water is dark but clear, fed by what appears to be a natural spring that bubbles up from cracks in the rock below. You test it cautiously. It's cold, clean, and completely fresh. This is a permanent, reliable water source that could support someone indefinitely. Around the well, you find other evidence of long-term habitation. Flat stones arranged like a work surface. The remains of what might have been a shelter, now mostly rotted away but with some structural elements still visible. Charcoal deposits that suggest regular fires were built here. Someone lived here. Not just survived, but established a semi-permanent residence with this well as the centerpiece. The location makes sense. It's elevated enough to stay dry during storms, hidden from view by the jungle canopy, and centered on the island with access to multiple areas. As you sit beside the well, filling your containers with the sweet cold water, you realize you've discovered something that changes all your calculations about survival on this island. You're not just a castaway trying to stay alive until rescue comes. You're potentially the latest in a series of people who have called this place home. The afternoon journey back to your beach camp gives you time to think about what this discovery means. Do you relocate your camp to be near this reliable water source? Do you continue exploring to see what other resources the map might reveal? And most pressing of all, what happened to the person who built this well and drew the map that led you here? Back at your beach camp, you spread the map out beside your fire and study it with new understanding. The person who drew this wasn't just passing through, they were planning for a long stay, possibly permanent residence. The well represents months or even years of work, carefully improving a natural feature into something that could sustain life indefinitely. This realization forces you to confront a question you've been avoiding. What if rescue never comes? What if this island isn't just a temporary survival situation, but your new home? The previous inhabitant clearly faced the same question and chose to build rather than simply endure. You examine the map more carefully, looking for clues about what happened to them. There are no dates on the map, no personal notes, nothing to indicate when it was drawn or why it was sealed in a bottle. The paper is old, certainly, but whether that means months or years or decades, you can't tell. What you can tell is that they were methodical and intelligent. Every marking on the map serves a purpose: water sources, resource locations, geographical features that would be important for navigation or shelter. This wasn't drawn by someone desperate and panicked, but by someone who had accepted their situation and was making the best of it. The question of relocating your camp becomes more pressing as you consider the advantages of the well site. It's a reliable water source that doesn't require the constant work of boiling and purifying. It's hidden from view, which could be important if there are dangers you haven't discovered yet. And it's centrally located, giving you better access to all parts of the island. But there are disadvantages too. It's inland, away from the beach where debris continues to wash up and where any rescue vessels would most likely spot you. It's also further from the tide pools you discovered and from the ocean itself, which provides both food and the possibility of signaling for help. As evening approaches, you make a compromise decision. You'll establish a secondary camp at the well site, but maintain your beach camp as well. This will give you the best of both worlds: reliable water inland and access to marine resources and potential rescue on the coast. You spend the evening planning the logistics of maintaining two camps. You'll need to split your supplies, establish travel routes between them, and create systems for moving resources back and forth. It's ambitious, but the well discovery has given you new confidence in your ability to not just survive, but to establish a real life here. Before you sleep, you roll the map carefully and place it back in the bottle, but don't seal it. This map is now your most valuable possession, and you'll need to refer to it constantly as you continue exploring the island and uncovering its secrets. Your first week on the island concludes with a major construction project, building a more permanent shelter near the well site. You've decided that this will become your primary residence, with the beach camp serving as a supply depot and signaling station. The work is exhausting but satisfying. Using techniques that are part memory, part experimentation, and part desperation, You begin constructing what amounts to a small cabin. You start with a raised platform, lashing together the straightest pieces of driftwood you can find and elevating it on posts driven into the ground. This will keep you dry during storms and away from any insects or small animals that might be active at ground level. The frame comes together slowly. You're learning as you go, making mistakes and figuring out corrections. Your lashing technique improves with practice, and you develop a system for measuring and cutting that makes the work more efficient. Each small success, a corner that's actually square, a joint that holds firm, feels like a major victory. For the roof, you experiment with different approaches to thatching, using palm fronds and other broad leaves. The technique is more complex than you initially thought. The fronds need to be layered like shingles, overlapping in a specific pattern that sheds water effectively. Your first attempts leak badly, but gradually you figure out the proper angle and overlap. While working, you find more evidence of the previous inhabitant. Cut marks on trees that are too clean to be natural damage. Stones that have been moved and arranged for purposes you can't quite determine. Most intriguingly, you discover what appears to be a small garden plot, now overgrown but with clear signs of having been deliberately cleared and cultivated. The garden area is maybe 20 feet square, located in a natural clearing that gets good sunlight but is protected from the strongest winds. The soil feels different here, richer and looser than the surrounding jungle floor. When you dig down a few inches, you find what looks like charcoal mixed into the earth, suggesting someone was deliberately improving the soil quality. This discovery raises new possibilities. If the previous resident was growing food, you might be able to do the same. You examine the overgrown area carefully, looking for any plants that might be descendants of whatever was cultivated here. You find several that don't match the surrounding jungle vegetation, plants that might be edible, though you'll need to test them carefully. As your shelter takes shape over several days, you establish routines that divide your time between the well site and the beach camp. Mornings are usually spent on construction and maintenance at the well. Afternoons are for trips to the beach to gather supplies, check for new debris, and scan the horizon for any sign of rescue vessels. The physical work is demanding, but you can feel yourself getting stronger and more capable. Your hands develop calluses, your stamina improves, and you begin to move through the jungle with increasing confidence and efficiency. While gathering materials for your shelter construction, you make a discovery that stops you cold. You're cutting vines about a quarter-mile from the well site when you notice something that doesn't belong in the natural landscape. A tree with deliberate cut marks, far too precise and numerous to be animal damage. Examining the cuts more closely, you realize they're not random. They form a pattern, parallel lines carved into the bark at roughly shoulder height, with what appears to be a counting system. Groups of 4 vertical lines, with a 5th line cutting diagonally across them. Someone was keeping track of something here, marking time or counting events. The tree itself is large and old, and the cuts have partially healed over with new bark growth, suggesting they were made years ago. But they're still clearly visible, and they tell a story of someone methodically recording information over an extended period. You follow a hunch and begin searching the area around the marked tree more systematically. Within a few minutes, you find more evidence of human presence, a clearing that's too regular to be natural, with stumps showing clean saw cuts rather than storm damage. Stones arranged in what might have been fire rings, and most significantly, the remains of what was clearly a substantial shelter. It's mostly collapsed now, reduced to a framework of posts and beams that are slowly being reclaimed by the jungle. But the construction is sophisticated, joints that show real carpentry skill, a design that would have provided substantial protection from weather. This wasn't a survival shelter like you're building, but a home intended for long-term residence. Near the collapsed shelter, you find artifacts that make your discovery even more intriguing. A rusted metal pot, much larger than your small salvaged one. The remains of what might have been furniture, wooden pieces that were once shaped for specific purposes, but are now too deteriorated to identify clearly. And buried under fallen leaves, a collection of tools that makes your folding knife seem primitive by comparison. The tools include a proper saw, now rusted but still recognizable, several chisels, and what might be carving tools. Most remarkably, a small anvil, just a block of metal, but clearly shaped for metalworking. This discovery changes your understanding of what's possible on this island. The previous resident wasn't just getting by, they were building a life, developing skills, creating infrastructure that could have supported them indefinitely. The level of organization and planning evident in these remains suggests someone who had not only accepted their situation, but had thrived in it. As you carefully examine each artifact, you're struck by a sobering thought. If this person was so well established, so capable of island life, what happened to them? The shelter and tools are abandoned, clearly unused for a significant time. Did they eventually get rescued? Did they try to leave and fail? Or did something else entirely change their situation? The questions multiply as you explore the area, but one thing becomes clear. You're not the first person to call this island home, and if you choose to stay, you won't be starting from nothing. You're inheriting the work and knowledge of someone who came before. You establish a new routine that balances construction work with documentation of your discoveries. Using pieces of charcoal on flat sections of bark, you begin keeping a journal, partly to record useful information, but also to maintain some connection to the civilized world you remember. The act of writing, even with primitive materials, helps keep your mind sharp and focused. Your journal entries start simple: weather observations, notes about which foods seem safe, records of your shelter construction progress. But increasingly you find yourself writing about the mysteries you're uncovering. The previous resident becomes a constant presence in your thoughts, someone you've never met, but whose work guides almost every decision you make. The shelter construction accelerates as you incorporate techniques suggested by the remains of the original builder's home. You notice how they positioned their structure to take advantage of prevailing breezes while staying protected from storm winds. You copy their method of creating drainage around the foundation, and you adapt their technique for securing the roof thatching. Your new home takes shape as something that's functional rather than beautiful, but solid and weather-resistant. The raised platform keeps you dry and provides storage space underneath. The slanted roof sheds water efficiently, and the walls, while simple, provide real protection from wind and rain. As the shelter nears completion, you turn your attention to other necessities. Food storage becomes a priority as you learn to preserve fish and fruit for longer periods. You construct simple drying racks using the previous resident's design, and you experiment with smoking meat over low fires, a technique that requires patience but produces food that stays edible for days. Water storage also improves dramatically. You create a system of containers that allows you to maintain several days' worth of drinking water at your inland camp, reducing the need for constant trips to collect and purify water. You even attempt to recreate some of the more sophisticated tools you found, using metal salvaged from the wreckage and techniques you half remember or figure out through trial and error. The work is satisfying in a way you hadn't expected. Each problem solved, each improvement made, gives you a sense of accomplishment that's different from anything you remember from your previous life. There's something pure about survival. Success is measured in simple, immediate terms. Did you stay dry last night? Do you have clean water to drink? Is there food for tomorrow? Your hands grow harder and more skilled. Your body adapts to the physical demands of island life. But perhaps most importantly, your mind begins to shift from thinking about temporary survival to considering permanent residence. Not because you've given up hope of rescue, but because you're discovering that life here has its own rewards and satisfactions. Each evening, as you sit beside your fire, reviewing the day's work and planning tomorrow's tasks, you feel a growing confidence that whatever happens, you can make a life here. It might not be the life you planned, but it's becoming a life you can respect. Two weeks into your island residence, you decide it's time for your first major exploration beyond the well area. According to the map, the eastern side of the island offers different terrain and potentially different resources. You prepare for what might be a multi-day expedition, the most ambitious journey you've attempted since arriving. Your pack includes enough food and water for 3 days, fire-starting materials, the precious map, and tools for both survival and documentation. You've also created a more sophisticated trail marking system, using both charcoal marks and small cairns of stacked stones that should be visible even if vegetation grows over your charcoal marks. The route to the eastern shore takes you through the most challenging terrain you've encountered yet. The jungle is denser here, with fewer animal trails to follow and more obstacles to navigate around. Massive fallen trees create barriers that require significant detours. Steep ravines force careful consideration of safe crossing points. But the map proves accurate once again, showing you the safest routes and warning you away from areas that would be impassable. The previous resident clearly explored every inch of this island and recorded their knowledge with remarkable precision. You begin to appreciate not just their practical skills, but their intelligence and thoroughness. After 6 hours of steady travel, you break through the jungle onto the eastern beach. The contrast with your familiar western shore is dramatic. Where your beach is sandy and gently curved, this coastline is rocky and dramatic, with cliffs rising directly from the water and small coves tucked between headlands. The eastern shore also faces different weather patterns. The waves here are larger and more aggressive, suggesting this side bears the brunt of storms and prevailing winds. But tucked into the protected coves, you discover tide pools that are larger and more diverse than anything you found on the northern shore. These tide pools contain creatures you haven't seen before. Larger crabs, different varieties of shellfish, sea anemones in brilliant colors, and small fish trapped in the pools during low tide. It's like discovering an underwater garden, and you realize this could be a major protein source if you can figure out safe ways to harvest and transport the catch back to your camps. You also discover why the map marked one particular cove as protected. It's a natural harbor, sheltered from the worst weather by surrounding cliffs, but with a narrow opening that allows smaller boats to enter safely. If you ever manage to build a seaworthy vessel, this would be the ideal launching point. The afternoon is spent exploring 3 different coves and beginning to understand the rhythms of this different ecosystem. The tides here are more dramatic, the difference between high and low water more extreme. This creates both opportunities and dangers, amazing access to marine resources at low tide, but potentially deadly conditions if you're caught in the wrong place when the tide returns. As evening approaches, you make camp in the protected cove, building a fire well above the high tide line and settling in for your first night away from your established camps. The sound of waves against rock is different from the gentle surf you're used to, more dramatic and urgent. Your exploration of the eastern shore reveals why the previous resident chose to establish their main camp inland rather than on either coast. This side of the island is spectacular but dangerous, with weather that can change rapidly and tides that create hazardous conditions without warning. Yet it also offers resources that could be crucial for long-term survival. The morning brings low tide, and your first opportunity to safely explore the largest tide pool complex. Working carefully and always keeping an eye on the water level, you learn to identify which creatures are safe to collect and which to avoid. The large crabs require careful handling but provide substantial meat. Certain shellfish are clearly healthy and abundant, while others show signs that suggest they might be toxic. You develop a harvesting system that allows you to collect enough protein for several days, while leaving enough creatures to maintain the population. It's a delicate balance. Take too much, and you'll deplete the resource. Take too little, and you're not making the difficult journey worthwhile. The work also teaches you about the complex ecosystem of the tide pools. Everything is connected. The sea anemones provide shelter for small fish. The crabs clean up debris that keeps the pools healthy. The various shellfish filter the water and provide food for larger predators. It's a miniature world that operates according to rules you're just beginning to understand. While working among the tide pools, you make another discovery that adds to the mystery of the previous resident. Carved into a flat rock face near the largest pool is what appears to be a calendar or counting system, rows of marks that seem to track lunar cycles or seasonal changes. The carving is old but still clear, suggesting someone spent considerable time here and needed to track time accurately. Near the carved calendar, you find evidence of regular visits, a fire ring positioned to be sheltered from wind, flat rocks arranged as a work surface, and most intriguingly, the remains of what appears to be a drying rack specifically designed for preserving seafood. The previous resident wasn't just visiting this area occasionally, they were making regular expeditions to harvest and process marine resources. This discovery changes your understanding of how to live successfully on the island. It's not enough to establish one camp and try to find everything you need nearby. The island's resources are distributed, and thriving here requires understanding the entire ecosystem and moving between different areas to harvest what each has to offer. You spend your second night on the eastern shore processing your harvest and planning how to incorporate regular trips to this area into your survival routine. The trip is too long and difficult to make frequently, but the protein resources here are too valuable to ignore. You'll need to plan expeditions carefully, timing them with weather and tides, and developing better techniques for preserving and transporting what you collect. As you sit beside your fire, looking out over the moonlit water and listening to the crash of waves against the cliffs, you realize that your understanding of survival has evolved. You're no longer just trying to stay alive until rescue comes. You're learning to live as part of this island's ecosystem, understanding its rhythms and seasons, and developing the skills to thrive in harmony with the natural world around you. The journey back from the eastern shore takes on the character of a supply expedition rather than simple exploration. Your pack is heavy with preserved seafood, and you've learned to identify several new edible plants that grow along the inland route. Each step teaches you something new about moving efficiently through the island's terrain while carrying substantial loads. You've also begun thinking systematically about the island's geography and resources. The map was accurate, but it was drawn by someone with different priorities than yours. You start creating your own annotations, marking the best routes between areas, noting seasonal changes in water sources, and identifying locations that could serve as emergency shelters during bad weather. Your mental map of the island is becoming sophisticated enough that you can plan multi-day expeditions with confidence. You know where to find water, where to expect difficult terrain, and how long each segment of travel should take. More importantly, you're learning to read the signs that predict weather changes and adjust your plans accordingly. Back at your well site camp, you establish new routines for processing and storing the resources you've gathered. The seafood requires careful preservation. Some can be dried, some smoked, and some needs to be consumed quickly. You develop systems for each type, learning through experimentation what works and what leads to spoilage. The work also gives you time to think about larger questions. How long do you plan to stay here? What would it take to build a vessel capable of reaching other land? Are there resources on the island that could support not just survival, but actual prosperity? These aren't immediate survival questions anymore. You have reliable water, adequate food, and solid shelter. The questions now are about what kind of life you want to build here, and whether that life should be temporary or permanent. You spend an entire day creating a comprehensive inventory of everything you know about the island's resources. Water sources, food sources, materials for construction and tool making, strategic locations for different types of activities. The list is longer than you expected, and it reveals something important. This island could support a much higher quality of life than you're currently living. Their abandoned camp showed evidence of metalworking, sophisticated food preservation, and construction techniques that went well beyond basic survival. They weren't just getting by, they were building a civilization for one. That evening, as you review your inventory by firelight, you make a decision that feels momentous. You're going to stop thinking of yourself as a castaway waiting for rescue and start thinking of yourself as a colonist building a new life. This doesn't mean giving up hope of eventual rescue, but it does mean investing in long-term projects and developing skills that assume you'll be here for years rather than weeks. The psychological shift is profound. Instead of just maintaining yourself until rescue comes, you're now planning to thrive, regardless of whether rescue ever arrives. A week of heavy storms tests every aspect of your survival systems and teaches you respect for the island's seasonal patterns. The weather arrives with little warning. What starts as increased wind and cloud cover rapidly develops into 3 days of driving rain and dangerous winds that make any outdoor activity hazardous. Your shelter holds up well, proving that the construction techniques you learned from the previous residents' remains were sound. The raised platform keeps you dry, the roof sheds water efficiently, and the walls provide real protection from the wind. But the storms also reveal weaknesses in your systems that need attention. Water collection works almost too well. Your containers overflow rapidly, and you realize you need better systems for managing surplus water during wet periods. Food storage becomes critical when you can't forage for 3 straight days. You learn the hard way which preservation methods actually work long-term, and which leave you with spoiled food when you most need reliable nutrition. The storms also provide unexpected benefits. New debris washes up on your beaches, including some pieces of metal and rope that significantly upgrade your tool-making capabilities. The heavy rains fill natural depressions with fresh water, giving you backup sources that reduce your dependence on the well during dry periods. Most importantly, the enforced confinement gives you time to think and plan without the constant pressure of immediate survival tasks. You use the time to refine your mental maps of the island, plan future expeditions, and design improvements to your camps and equipment. You also spend considerable time thinking about the previous resident. The storms make clear why they chose to establish their main camp in the protected inland location rather than on any of the beaches. The weather here can be severe enough to destroy anything that isn't solidly built and carefully positioned. But the storms also raise questions about their ultimate fate. Did they survive seasons of weather like this for years, only to be defeated by some other challenge? Did they eventually attempt to leave the island during a particularly severe storm season? Or did they simply decide that a life of isolation, however comfortable, wasn't worth continuing? When the weather finally clears, you emerge from your shelter with a new appreciation for the island's power and unpredictability. The jungle looks different after the storms, greener and more lush, but also more wild and untamed. Several large trees have fallen, creating new obstacles, but also providing new sources of construction material. Your first priority is checking your other camps and supply caches. The beach camp has suffered some damage. Part of your emergency shelter has been destroyed, and some supplies have been scattered or damaged by wind and rain. But the damage is repairable, and you realize that maintaining multiple camps provides important redundancy against weather-related disasters. You spend the next several days repairing storm damage and improving your weather resistance based on what you learned during the storms. Each improvement makes you more confident about surviving future weather events, but also more committed to staying long enough to face them. In the aftermath of the storms, you discover something that changes your perspective on both the island's dangers and its possibilities. While collecting new debris from the beach, you find what appears to be part of a ship's mast, not from your own vessel, but from something much larger and more substantial. The timber is old and weathered, but the construction is sophisticated. Metal fittings that you recognize as being from a sailing ship, carved details that suggest a vessel of considerable size and value. Most intriguingly, you find carved into the wood what appears to be a name, Meridian, in letters that were once painted but are now just faint traces in the carved grooves. This discovery raises profound questions about your island's location and history. You're clearly not in some remote, uncharted area. Ships have passed this way before, and at least one has been wrecked here. The previous resident whose tools and camp you discovered might not have been the only other person to find themselves stranded here. You begin examining the shoreline more systematically, looking for other evidence of past wrecks. What you find is sobering, scattered pieces of metal and wood that clearly come from multiple vessels, spanning what appears to be decades or even longer. Some pieces are so old and weathered that they're barely recognizable as having human origin. Your island, you realize, is not just a random piece of land in the ocean. It's located along what must be a shipping route, in an area where storms or navigation hazards have claimed multiple vessels over time. This explains why the previous resident was so skilled and well-equipped. They might have had access to resources from several wrecks, not just their own. But this discovery also suggests something more troubling. If ships pass this way regularly enough for multiple wrecks to occur, Why hasn't anyone ever been rescued from this island? What prevents ships from spotting survivors or landing to provide assistance? You spend the day exploring the coastline with new eyes, trying to understand the navigation hazards that might make this area dangerous for ships. What you discover is that your island sits among a scattered group of smaller islands and rock formations that would be difficult to navigate safely, especially in bad weather or poor visibility. From most directions, the island would be hard to distinguish from the surrounding rocks and smaller land masses until a ship was already committed to a dangerous course. The safe approaches are limited and not obvious from a distance. It's an almost perfect trap for unwary vessels. This understanding brings both hope and concern. Hope because it means you're not in some completely isolated area where no ships ever pass. Concern because it suggests that even if ships do pass nearby, the local navigation hazards might prevent them from providing rescue even if they spot your signals. That evening, you begin planning a more systematic approach to signaling for rescue. Simple fires on the beach might not be enough. You need signals that are visible from a distance and clearly indicate human presence, not just natural phenomena. The previous residents' experience suggests that passive waiting for rescue might not be effective. You need to take active steps to make rescue possible. You also begin planning your first attempt at building a seaworthy vessel. If rescue ships can't safely approach the island, you might need to reach them instead. The boat-building project begins with the sobering realization that you're attempting something that could mean the difference between escape and death. Unlike shelter construction or food gathering, where mistakes are uncomfortable but not fatal, a poorly built vessel could kill you miles from shore with no possibility of rescue. You start by studying every piece of maritime debris you can find, trying to understand the construction techniques used in real ships. The timber from the Meridian becomes your textbook, showing you how professional shipwrights joined wood, sealed gaps, and created structures strong enough to survive ocean conditions. Your first attempts are deliberately small and simple, basically rafts that you can test in the protected waters of your home bay. Using the straightest pieces of driftwood you can find, you experiment with different lashing techniques and try to understand how to create a platform that's both stable and maneuverable. The initial results are discouraging. Your first raft falls apart within minutes of launching. The second stays together but spins uncontrollably in even light currents. The third is stable enough for testing, but so heavy that you can barely move it on land, let alone paddle it effectively in water. Each failure teaches you something important about marine engineering. Weight distribution affects stability. The shape of the hull determines how the craft moves through water. The method of propulsion, paddle, sail, or pole, dictates much of the design. Most critically, you learn that building something seaworthy requires materials and techniques you don't currently possess. But the failures also clarify what you need to accomplish before attempting a serious escape vessel. You need better tools for woodworking, stronger and more flexible materials for lashing, and a much deeper understanding of how boats actually work. Most importantly, you need a workspace where you can build something large enough to handle open ocean conditions. The protected cove on the eastern shore emerges as the obvious choice for serious boat construction. It offers deeper water for testing, natural windbreaks for working in various weather conditions, and, most importantly, a clear route to open ocean that doesn't require navigating through the rock formations that make rescue approaches so dangerous. You begin planning a major expedition to establish a boat-building workshop at the Eastern Cove. This will require moving tools and materials across the island, creating shelter and storage at the new site, and developing techniques for working with much larger pieces of timber than you've handled before. The project also forces you to think seriously about what kind of voyage you're planning. A vessel capable of reaching the nearest shipping lanes might need to cover dozens or even hundreds of miles of open ocean. The boat would need to carry enough water and food for several days at sea, remain stable in rough weather, and be manageable by a single person with limited sailing experience. As you examine the materials available to you, the scope of the challenge becomes clear. This isn't a project you can complete in weeks or even months. Building a truly seaworthy vessel will require the better part of a year, assuming everything goes well and you don't encounter major setbacks. That evening, as you sit beside your fire sketching rough boat designs with charcoal on bark, you realize you've crossed another psychological threshold. You're no longer just surviving or even thriving, you're planning to engineer your own rescue. Three weeks into your residency on the island, you experience something that drives home the isolation and uncertainty of your situation. You spot what might be a ship on the horizon. The sighting occurs during your morning routine at the beach camp, just as you're checking for overnight debris and scanning the horizon for weather changes. At first, you're not sure what you're seeing. A dark speck appears and disappears among the distant swells, too far away to make out details, but moving in a way that suggests human origin rather than natural phenomena. Your heart rate accelerates as you realize this could be your first opportunity for rescue. You race to build the largest signal fire you can manage, piling driftwood and dried vegetation into a structure that should produce visible smoke even in daylight. Your hands shake as you work with the lighter, and it takes several attempts to get the fire started properly. When it finally catches, you feed it everything flammable you can find, creating a column of smoke that rises straight up in the still morning air. For nearly an hour, you maintain the fire and watch the distant speck, willing it to change course toward your island. You wave pieces of bright fabric, arrange rocks into SOS patterns on the sand, and do everything you can think of to make your presence obvious to anyone scanning the horizon with binoculars. But gradually, it becomes clear that the ship, if it was a ship, is continuing on its original course. The speck grows smaller and eventually disappears completely, leaving you alone on the beach with a dying fire and the crushing realization that being so close to rescue but unable to achieve it might be worse than having no hope of rescue at all. The disappointment is profound and disorienting. For an hour, rescue seemed possible, even likely. You had allowed yourself to imagine hot food, clean clothes, communication with the outside world, and return to your former life. Having that possibility snatched away leaves you feeling more isolated than before the sighting occurred. But the experience also teaches you important lessons about rescue signaling. Your fire was visible to you, but was it large enough to be spotted from 10 or 20 miles away? Would smoke be visible against a cloudy sky or in different lighting conditions? Are there better locations on the island for signal fires? Places with higher elevation or better visibility in multiple directions? You spend the afternoon exploring potential signal locations, particularly the higher ground in the island's interior. What you discover is that several hilltops offer commanding views of the surrounding ocean, and signal fires positioned there would be visible from much greater distances than anything you could create at beach level. The sighting also motivates you to think more systematically about rescue strategies. Passive signaling, fires that you build when you happen to spot a ship, clearly isn't sufficient. You need permanent signals that operate continuously, systems that don't depend on your being in the right place at the right time. That evening, You begin planning a network of signal stations across the island, positioned to be visible from ships approaching from any direction. It's an ambitious project, but the memory of watching a potential rescue sail away without seeing you provides all the motivation you need. The false rescue sighting catalyzes a period of intense activity focused on escape preparation. You establish a daily routine that balances immediate survival needs with longer-term projects aimed at getting off the island. Your days become carefully structured around water collection, food gathering, shelter maintenance, and what you start thinking of as escape work. The escape work includes signal fire preparation, boat design and testing, and systematic exploration of the island's highest points for permanent signal installations. You create supply caches at strategic locations, stockpiling materials you'll need for major construction projects, and ensuring you can work efficiently even during extended periods away from your main camps. Your exploration of the island's interior reveals terrain you hadn't previously discovered. Following ridgelines and animal trails, you climb to elevations that provide panoramic views of the surrounding ocean. From the highest peak, you can see for what must be dozens of miles in every direction, and you understand why this location would be ideal for permanent signaling. But the elevated exploration also confirms what you suspected about the island's position among hazardous waters. You can clearly see the scattered rocks, shoals, and smaller islands that would make navigation treacherous for any vessel attempting to approach. Your island sits at the center of what amounts to a maritime maze, accessible only to someone who knows the safe channels. This understanding helps explain both why ships get wrecked here and why rescue is so difficult. Even if a ship's crew spots your signals and wants to help, actually reaching the island safely would require local knowledge that few mariners would possess. The realization reinforces your decision to focus on building an escape vessel rather than simply waiting for rescue. If you can navigate away from the island in a small, maneuverable boat, you might be able to reach the clear water where rescue ships could safely operate. You begin stockpiling materials for serious boat construction, focusing on the longest, straightest pieces of timber you can find. The work is physically demanding. Some of the logs you need are massive, requiring elaborate systems of ropes and levers to move them from where you find them to where you need them for construction. But the physical challenge is satisfying in a way that surprises you. There's something deeply fulfilling about working with your hands on a project that could literally save your life. Each piece of timber shaped, each joint cut, each section of hull planked brings you closer to independence and the possibility of controlling your own fate. Your tool-making skills improve dramatically as the demands of boat construction push you to create better equipment. You learn to forge basic metalworking tools, using techniques adapted from the abandoned materials you found at the previous residence camp. Your cutting tools become sharper and more durable, your measuring and marking more precise. As your first month on the island draws to a close, you take inventory not just of your supplies and shelters, but of your capabilities and knowledge. The scared, disoriented castaway who washed up on this beach 4 weeks ago has been replaced by someone who can make tools, build shelters, navigate jungle terrain, and plan complex engineering projects. You're no longer just surviving. You're becoming someone who could actually thrive in this environment indefinitely if necessary. But more importantly, you're becoming someone with the skills and knowledge to engineer your own escape. Your food preservation experiments yield both successes and failures, that teach you the critical importance of reliable nutrition for long-term survival. Working with the techniques you've observed from the previous residents' remains, and adapting methods you half remember from your former life, you develop systems for extending the useful life of both plant and animal foods. Smoking proves to be the most reliable method for preserving fish and crabs from your tide pool harvests. You construct a simple smoking chamber using stones and salvaged metal, learning through trial and error how to maintain the right temperature and smoke density to properly cure meat without cooking it. The process requires constant attention for 12 to 16 hours, but produces food that remains edible for weeks when stored properly. Fruit preservation is more challenging and requires different approaches for different types of produce. Some fruits dry well when sliced thin and exposed to sun and air. Others ferment into alcoholic beverages that, while intoxicating, also provide calories and remain safe to consume long after fresh fruit would spoil. A few types can be processed into pastes that keep well when sealed in containers made from gourds or salvaged containers. Your experiments also teach you about food storage systems that protect preserved foods from insects, rodents, and moisture. You develop techniques for creating sealed containers, elevated storage that animals can't reach, and rotation systems that ensure you consume older stores before they deteriorate. But not all experiments succeed. You lose significant quantities of food to spoilage, insect infestation, and techniques that simply don't work in the island's climate. Each failure represents not just wasted effort, but also lost nutrition that you can't easily replace. The failures teach you to be more conservative in your experiments and to maintain larger reserves of foods preserved by proven methods. The preservation work also gives you insight into the seasonal patterns that affect food availability. Certain fruits ripen at predictable times. Tide pool harvests are better during specific lunar phases, and weather patterns affect both the abundance and the quality of available foods. Understanding these cycles allows you to plan preservation work for times when food is abundant, creating reserves for periods when fresh food is scarce. As your food security improves, you find yourself able to dedicate more time and energy to longer-term projects. Knowing that you have several weeks' worth of preserved food stored safely allows you to spend consecutive days working on boat construction or signal station development without constantly worrying about immediate nutrition needs. The psychological impact of food security is as important as the nutritional benefits. Having reliable access to adequate food removes one of the most basic survival stresses, allowing your mind to focus on planning and problem solving rather than constantly calculating where your next meal will come from. Your preserved food stores also represent a form of wealth and independence that changes how you think about your situation. Instead of being at the mercy of daily foraging success, you have resources that could sustain you through extended periods of bad weather, injury, or focus on projects that don't directly contribute to immediate survival. As you organize your growing food stores, you realize that you've achieved something the previous resident clearly understood: the transition from day-to-day survival to genuine food security that enables long-term planning and ambitious projects. Your second major expedition takes you to the western side of the island, terrain that the map indicates, but that you haven't yet explored systematically. The journey reveals landscape that's different from both the eastern cliffs and the central jungle, offering new resources and new challenges for your expanding understanding of the island's possibilities. The western shore is characterized by a series of sea caves carved into limestone cliffs by centuries of wave action. Some caves are accessible only at low tide, while others extend deep enough into the cliff face to provide shelter even during storms. The map's notation about fresh water in one of these caves proves accurate. You discover a cave system where freshwater springs emerge from the rock face, creating pools of clean drinking water well above the reach of ocean tides. This discovery provides you with a third major water source, reducing your dependence on both the central well and your beach-level stream. But more importantly, the cave system offers possibilities for long-term storage and workshop space that could be crucial for major construction projects. The largest cave extends nearly 100 feet into the cliff, with a ceiling high enough for you to stand upright and multiple chambers that remain dry even during heavy storms. Natural shelves in the rock provide storage space, and the constant temperature makes it ideal for preserving both food and materials that might deteriorate in the variable conditions of your outdoor camps. But the cave system also contains evidence that makes you reassess everything you thought you understood about the island's history. In the deepest chamber, well beyond the reach of any storm surge, you find what can only be described as a workshop. Not the primitive tool collection you discovered at the inland camp, but a sophisticated operation that suggests serious, long-term industrial activity. The workshop contains tools and equipment that are far more advanced than anything you've found elsewhere on the island. A forge with bellows, anvils of different sizes, and metalworking tools that show signs of regular use over extended periods. Woodworking benches with precision cutting and measuring tools. Most remarkably, what appears to be the partially completed hull of a substantial boat, far larger and more sophisticated than anything you've attempted. The boat hull shows craftsmanship that goes well beyond survival improvisation. The wood is carefully selected and precisely joined. The design shows understanding of advanced marine engineering principles, and the scale suggests a vessel capable of extended ocean voyages. But it's also clearly unfinished, and has been abandoned for what appears to be a considerable time. Near the boat hull, you find personal items that provide the first real clues about the previous resident's identity and fate. A leather journal, water-damaged but partially readable, contains entries that span several years of island residence. Tools that are clearly personal possessions rather than improvised survival gear. Most soberly, what appears to be a grave marker with dates that suggest the previous resident died here rather than escaping or being rescued. As you examine these discoveries by torchlight, you realize that you're not just following in the footsteps of another castaway, but inheriting the life's work of someone who spent years developing the infrastructure and skills necessary for island life. The unfinished boat suggests they were working toward escape right up until whatever prevented them from completing the project. The discovery is both inspiring and sobering. Inspiring because it proves that sophisticated engineering projects are possible with the island's resources. Sobering because it suggests that even someone with years of experience and advanced skills didn't succeed in escaping. The cave workshop becomes your most important discovery since the bottle map, not just for its resources, but for what it teaches you about the previous residents' final years. Spending a full day carefully examining the workshop and reading the legible portions of the journal, you piece together a story that's both remarkable and tragic. The journal entries, written in the same careful handwriting as the map, span what appears to be nearly a decade of island residence. The early entries describe familiar struggles: establishing shelter, finding water, learning to preserve food. But the later entries reveal someone who had moved far beyond basic survival to create what amounts to a one-person civilization. The previous resident, who refers to himself only as M in the journal, had developed systems for metalworking that allowed him to create sophisticated tools and hardware. His woodworking had advanced to furniture making and precision joinery. Most impressively, he had established what amounted to sustainable manufacturing capabilities, turning raw island materials into finished goods that could support an advanced lifestyle. But the journal also reveals the psychological toll of extended isolation. Early entries are optimistic and focused on practical matters. Later entries become increasingly philosophical, dwelling on questions about the meaning of solitary life and the value of achievements that no one else will ever see. The final readable entries suggest someone who had achieved remarkable self-sufficiency but was struggling with depression and a sense of purposelessness. The unfinished boat represents M's final project, begun in what the journal suggests was his 8th year on the island. The design is ambitious, a vessel large enough to carry supplies for an extended voyage, sophisticated enough to handle serious ocean conditions, and equipped with sail and steering systems that would allow single-handed operation across hundreds of miles of open water. But the project was never completed. Based on the journal dates and the amount of work remaining on the hull, M appears to have died while the boat was perhaps 6 months from completion. The grave marker you found confirms this, dates indicating he lived on the island for nearly 9 years before his death. The workshop contains everything needed to complete M's boat, and his journal includes detailed notes about the construction techniques and remaining work. You realize that you've inherited not just tools and materials, but a complete blueprint for escaping the island using methods that took someone nearly a decade to develop. But you've also inherited a sobering lesson about the psychological challenges of long-term isolation. M's journal makes clear that technical success in island living doesn't automatically translate to psychological well-being. Even someone who had achieved remarkable self-sufficiency eventually struggled with depression and loss of motivation. As you organize M's tools and study his boat design, you understand that you're facing the same fundamental choice he faced: commit to island life as a permanent situation and find ways to make it psychologically sustainable, or focus everything on escape while you still have the motivation and hope necessary to sustain such an ambitious project. That evening, camping in the cave for the first time, you begin making plans to complete M's boat while also incorporating his other innovations into your own island infrastructure. You're no longer just a castaway trying to survive. You're the inheritor of nearly a decade of engineering and craftsmanship, with both the opportunity and the responsibility to build on what came before. As your first month on the island concludes, you take comprehensive inventory of your situation, your resources, and your prospects. The scared, disoriented survivor who washed ashore 4 weeks ago has been replaced by someone with multiple camps, reliable food and water sources, sophisticated tool-making capabilities, and most importantly, a clear plan for engineering. An escape. Your beach camp serves as a supply depot and primary signaling station, positioned to take advantage of marine resources and maintain visibility for any rescue opportunities. Your inland camp at the well provides secure shelter and serves as your main residence, offering protection from storms and access to the island's central resource areas. The cave workshop gives you manufacturing capabilities that could support projects ranging from advanced boat construction to permanent signal installations. The resource inventory is substantial. You have identified and tested multiple water sources, developed reliable food preservation techniques, and created tool-making capabilities that allow you to manufacture equipment rather than simply improvising with salvaged materials. Most critically, you have inherited M's decade of engineering work, including detailed plans for a seaworthy vessel and the tools necessary to complete it. Your understanding of the island itself has evolved from seeing it as a prison to understanding it as a complex ecosystem that can support not just survival, but genuine prosperity for someone with the skills to work with its natural systems. You've learned the seasonal patterns that affect resource availability, the weather cycles that determine safe travel times, and the geographical features that offer both opportunities and hazards. But the month has also taught you about the psychological challenges of isolation and the importance of maintaining hope and purpose even when facing an indefinite stay. M's journal provides a roadmap not just for technical survival, but for the mental disciplines necessary to maintain motivation and psychological health during extended periods alone. Your plans for the second month are ambitious but achievable. Complete the move of essential tools and materials to the cave workshop. Begin serious work on M's boat design, starting with the hull sections that require the most complex joinery and metalwork. Establish permanent signal stations at the island's highest points, creating systems that don't depend on your constant attention. Most importantly, begin the transition from thinking like a temporary castaway to thinking like a permanent resident who happens to be working on an escape project. This psychological shift allows you to invest in long-term infrastructure improvements while maintaining the focus and motivation necessary for boat construction. As you sit in the cave workshop, reviewing M's journal by firelight and planning your work for the coming weeks, you feel something you haven't experienced since the shipwreck: genuine optimism about the future. Not just hope for rescue or survival, but confidence that you can build a life worth living, regardless of how long you remain here. You're no longer just surviving on this island, you're inheriting it, improving it, and preparing to master it completely. Whether that mastery eventually leads to escape or to a permanent new life remains to be seen. But either outcome now seems not just possible, but achievable through your own efforts and skills. The island that seemed like a death sentence a month ago has revealed itself to be something entirely different, an opportunity to discover capabilities you never knew you possessed and to build something meaningful with your own hands. You've survived your first month, but survival is just the beginning. You've learned to find water, to catch fish, to build shelter from the storm. But what you haven't learned yet is the most important lesson this island has to teach. You are not the first person to wash up on this beach. The debris you found wasn't just from your ship. Those tools scattered in the sand, they belonged to someone else. Someone who faced the same desperate choices you're facing now. Someone who learned the same hard lessons about survival and left behind something that will change everything you think you know about this place. Join us next time as you discover that the real challenge isn't learning to survive on a deserted island. It's learning to survive on an island where you're not alone, where someone else's story is about to become your inheritance, and where the line between salvation and betrayal is written in the sand. What happens when you realize the island's greatest resource isn't fresh water or food or shelter? What happens when you discover that someone else's desperate choices might become the key to your escape or the reason you never leave? Find out next time in episode 2, where you'll learn that sometimes the most dangerous discovery isn't what you find on a deserted island, it's finding out it was never deserted at all.